The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience Super Bowl DraftKings Showdown contest picks preview, and the most important part, the strategy behind it all. $10 entry on DraftKings. There's many showdown tournaments. The $10 one, $1 million for first prize. That's something that I would like to win. Probably won't, but maybe one of you two can after we talk to my two guests today. One of them coming up a little bit later on, Brandon Guptill from gupscorner.com, with his strategy been very successful at Showdown, and the king of Showdown himself from dailyroto.com. Colin Drew, how many Showdown contests have you won this year?
I think it ended up being around 7. Obviously, a bunch of those chopped up with other users and everything, but pretty crazy. I was always kind of a fan of the main slates, and I was kind of pissed at DraftKings when they pulled back and went to the Showdown model. And I don't know, a year later, Showdown's like the best thing that's happened to me.
Are you think you're going to get in? Because there's not only the $10 million top prize Showdown slate, there's also the second half Showdown slate. Do you have, just before we get into, because we'll talk about that a little bit at the end, do you have any takes on that whatsoever, or is that just going to be a crapshoot?
So I'm a Patriots fan, so I probably won't play the second half unless it goes really poorly and I need to lock myself up in the bedroom. But I do think there would be an edge because a lot of sites and content places have projections out, but they're not going to reflect the second half. And so, depending how the game flow goes, one team might be behind and need to throw a lot, who's going to get the ball during the second half. So you could adjust projections there. And I actually think it's kind of interesting. If there's edge in the first half stuff, I feel in the full game showdowns, I feel like there probably is still some edge in the second half showdown slates.
I want to let everyone know if they want to enter one of these contests, you can get into 2 separate draws for $20 DK. That's 2 entries into this $1 million top prize tournament. The first one you can do, smash the like button, leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section, and all the players under $5,000 on this showdown slate for the big game. If you had to play 150 lineups and I told you had to stick one of those guys into every single one below 5,000, which one would it be? Now, the easier route to get your $20 DK, because far fewer people actually do it, go to the audio podcast, whether it be iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, wherever it may be, leave a review. 5 stars for the Pat Mayo Experience. Say something nice about the show, leave your DraftKings handle, and you too are in a draw for $20 DK. The winners will be announced on Monday's golf show with Jeff Feinberg, the same place you can find the Listeners League link, which, Colin, you got to say that this golf tournament's pretty good, right?
Yeah, I got in there last week. I finished inside the top 5, some rake-free money, some beer money next time I'm up in Toronto.
Yes, yeah, I'm like you said, you got $60 in rake-free money because you put in the 3 entries. So, I mean, $60 in American money, you could feed my family for like 3 decades.
Or I could feed your kid for like a week.
This is true. Or buy him diapers for like 3 days. We'll see. But let's talk about this. Why have you been so successful at these showdown slates? Are you just playing 150 lineups in every single one of them? And of course, if you play 150 lineups, there's no way you can lose. I hear that all the time. I've played 150 lineups in tournaments before, and I've lost. Maybe it's just because I'm garbage at this, but it's not just, hey, you're going to win if you put in 150 lineups. But let's say you had your $1,500 to play this tournament. What do you do with those lines? Let's say you only had 1 or even 10. How do you distribute? Do you just look for as many permutations as possible, or do you really key in on like 3 to 4 guys or team stacks and do it that way?
Yeah, I would say that my success in Showdown has been driven almost entirely by lineup construction and kind of strategy there, opposed to actual projections. I really lean on Drew and Mike at Daily Roto to guide the projections, and that lets me kind of focus more on the game theory and the correlations. And I do think that the correlations in the single game contest are where the biggest edge is right now. That will eventually go away, or it will reduce a little bit as more content gets out there. But I think that focusing on lineups that actually make sense and tell the story is the right way to go. So I am creating 150 lineups for almost all of the main showdown contests, and focusing to make sure that all of my lineups are correlated, not just in the lineup as a whole, but also specifically as it relates to the captain position. And I think that the captain position drives a lot of the edge in showdown as well.
Let's talk about how you can generate this many lineups and optimize them properly. During the course of the football season, I actively encourage a lot of my viewers and listeners to use the Daily Roto product, one that I used. I know that Paul Shag behind the camera, he was using. I had a pretty good football season. Not as good as my golf season, but I didn't lose my shirt, which I generally do on DraftKings during the football season. This year I didn't. So if you go to dailyroto.com and you sign up either for the football package, the upcoming baseball package, the in-season NBA package, if you use the promo code PME, THEPME, you get yourself 10% off. And I use it. It's made me a better player. And Colin, you have worked the parameters that you can filter the optimizer to tell the story for you, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's been the biggest thing for me and for our subscribers as well, is the groups functionality that lets you set rules for your lineups, both whenever a player is used, kind of some of the rules you can talk about there, and we'll go into specifics on the slate for some groups you might want to consider. But then it also lets you create lineups that says, if a player is captain, then do this. So you could say, if Tom Brady is captain, then I want to pair him with at least 2 pass catchers. And you can create rules like that. So the biggest thing I had learned throughout the process was how many dead lineups people are creating with rules that don't make sense. And if you're able to smartly construct your lineups, you can have 150 lineups that are very unique, that are different from each other, but are all plausible things that could happen. And that is the biggest thing and the biggest edge. And I do think it is important to have a lineup optimizer to mass multi-enter some of these tournaments. And I don't think I would have the same success in Showdown if I was going with a single entry approach.
Again, dailyroto.com, or as Davis Maddock would say, who's over there now, dailyrodeo.com. You don't want to go there. I mean, the prize pools for Daily Rodeo, not substantial as of yet. Now, if like TNN comes back and they're playing it like right after Monday Night Raw or ECW back in the day, then we're talking. Right now, it's dailyroto.com. Promo code PME to get yourself 10% off. Give me an example from this Showdown slate itself of what you would consider a bad lineup that doesn't tell the right story.
Yeah. So believe it or not, you do see some lineups that will play like Julian Edelman at captain, and they won't play Tom Brady. And that lineup just doesn't make sense. If Edelman's going to be the highest scoring player, generally the highest scoring player or the best value relative to salary is going to be the captain on the optimal team. And if Edelman's going to do that, he's going to have to catch at least 1 touchdown, possibly multiple touchdowns. And that means that Brady's going to have a big day as well. And so that would be the number one biggest mistake I would see from some users, is playing a wide receiver at captain without using a quarterback for that same lineup.
Are there different sides of the game, like in this game where the over-under is right around 57 as we speak right now, that some people will play defenses or potentially play kickers? Now, I've seen defense and kicker lineups do really well in some of these Showdown slates. Is the over-under going to dictate what you do in those positions? Because are they like cross-offs for this sort of slate?
I wouldn't say that the kickers are cross-offs. The defense is potentially more of a cross-off, especially in like Tom Brady doesn't turn the ball over very much. And so it's less likely that you're going to get a ceiling performance from the Rams defense in this slate than it might be if they had an inferior opponent. I do think the kickers end up being viable. And a couple of the showdowns that I won in the playoffs did have kickers on the winning lineups. That Saints versus Rams game, I had Greg Zuerlein on the winning showdown team. It looks like on the Baltimore versus Los Angeles, I had Michael Badgley on the winning team, and then I had Stephen Gostkowski on the winning team for the Patriots versus the Chargers. So I definitely have had kickers on the winning team multiple times throughout the playoffs, and it really depends what happens with the value on the slate. At the end of the day, the way a kicker ends up on the optimal lineup is if they outscore other people that are priced cheaper. And on this slate, you're basically comparing someone like Gostkowski to someone like Chris Hogan or Dorsett. And so those are the type of performances you're kind of talking about. And that's what's going to swing whether or not a kicker is in the optimal, is the performance of some of the value players.
As it pertains to the captain's pick, the player that you're going to get 1.5 times the points for, and you have to pay 1.5 times the salary for, do you ever make a quarterback or the most expensive player, like on this slate, it would be Julian Edelman, your captain? Over 150 lineups, maybe you do, but if you had to whittle that down a little bit, do you think it makes more sense to go into the mid-tier with a captain and work your lineup around that because you get access to better players?
I typically end up spending more captain spots on some of the higher priced players and some of the studs, and then filling out the value spots with some of the more volatile guys and taking kind of a shotgun approach with the value players and then honing in on some of the captains. So I definitely plan on having Edelman in the captain spot in some rosters, and I'll have him paired up with Tom Brady on 100% of the lineups that have Edelman as the captain. I do think that most of the time you need one of the highest scoring players to be the captain, and I think that the highest price guys are most often going to get there. So I would say that is one of the areas where I see some people making mistakes, is getting a little too cute with the captain spot.
So James Devlin is my captain. Probably not the best move.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, you see some weird stuff. You see, what like fourth, fifth string wide receivers and backup tight ends and things like that. So for the captain, I mean, they're going to have to crack 100 yards and score a touchdown most of the time.
How often do you use quarterbacks in your captain spot?
It depends. That one's for sure team and slate specific, but I'm willing to use quarterbacks in the captain spot. I do think that's another area where people make mistakes more often than not in Showdown is kind of understanding what's going to happen if the quarterback is going to need to be the captain. And so the big 150K score that I had with the Saints was Drew Brees in the captain spot with Traquan Smith and Cameron Meredith on that team. And so that was a pretty contrarian way of attacking a Drew Brees captain team, but I definitely had exposure to him at the captain spot.
If you're going to use either Brady or Goff in this game as your captain, how many receivers do you put with him? Like, do you want to go down the line and say, hey, if I'm playing Tom Brady, I might as well get some Julian Edelman, some Chris Hogan, some Philip Dorsett, some Rob Gronkowski, and someone to bring it back the other way? Is that just too many guys to have as a stack?
It's probably not too many. I think you need at least two in there, and I think you could go bigger. It kind of depends how the game goes, and that's one of the things with the Daily Roto Optimizer. You can simulate different game environments, so you could run like 50 teams with basically using the Vegas odds as a projected finish, or you could run 25 teams with a Patriots blowout where the Patriots win by 2 touchdowns, and kind of simulate the teams that way, and the projections will automatically customize and reflect that scoring environment. And so I'd like to build that way too, to get exposure to different kind of sets of game outcomes. A lot of people are just running lineups based on what they think is going to happen and not taking to account some of those different scenarios.
I talked about this a little bit on the prop show that I did with Andrew Cust and Feinberg. And usually when I have those two on, I so rarely make like a salient point because everyone's just there for a bunch of laughs and some losing bets. But you even see this in the prop market. I feel like there's substantial value on unders almost across the board in terms of the betting market for Super Bowl props, because people aren't actually assessing how they want the game or how they think the game's going to unfold. They're just betting on what they want to see happen to make it as entertaining as possible, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like that. And I feel like there's value to the under on the game as a whole, especially for two offenses that have shown like the desire to run the ball a lot during the postseason. So I could see the game going under, and I could see the same thing happening where it doesn't turn into the shootout that people are hoping for.
Finally, before we just talk a little bit more about strategy questions here, how low is too low? Like if I go to the very bottom here, you have your $0 players if you want to get Kenyon Burner into the game. But how, like, is James Devlin viable at $400? You would need him to score 2 touchdowns, obviously, and that's in his range of outcomes. But would you even waste a lineup, even in 150 with someone like him?
So I would definitely not waste the James Devlin lineup at captain, for sure not. The captain spot is too important to kind of punt a team there. I would consider wasting lineups on guys like James Devlin in the flex spots, because sometimes it's just like a catch or two. And if the game breaks the perfect way and all the highest priced players go off in a really concentrated way, you don't need more than like 2 catches for 20 yards for that guy to pop into the optimals. James Devlin specifically is $400. I don't think there's another guy that really has a pulse that's priced that cheap. And so that would be the only way that he ends up in an optimal, is really if all of the highest priced guys go off in a super concentrated game. I probably won't have a lot. He's the type of guy to only have on a couple teams out of 150, and I would definitely avoid him in 20 max tournaments.
Yeah, he's the only one with a pulse below $1,000. But when you creep up a little bit, you got Cordero Patterson sitting there. You have both of the Rams tight ends. Or if this was the WWF, Josh Gordon at $200 with like a return at halftime could be in play.
It is extremely likely that one of these guys below $2,000 or below $4,000 ends up on the optimal team between someone like Tyler Higbee, Cordell Patterson. And so I could see like those paths happening with some degree of frequency. And those are the type of players that I usually don't take a big stand on one of them, but I do try to get exposure to multiple of them throughout my lineups. We have seen Dorsett catch a couple touchdown passes during the postseason, and I think that he'll be like a popular punt option relatively. And I think someone like Chris Hogan also makes sense. And then the kickers, I wouldn't be surprised at all if one of these kickers ended up on an optimal lineup. One of the things I will try to do is avoid having the same, like two kickers on the same lineup, depending on the game environment. And I think that's another thing you can kind of create rules about with an optimizer to ensure across 150 teams, you're not, loading in two kickers on a bunch of them.
As it pertains to the kickers, is it best to pair them with the running backs? Like, if you think that this is a game where it hits the under of 57, that's the game script that you're telling yourself, and you're trying to tell yourself the story that it's just going to be a lot of grind back and forth. Maybe it's lower scoring, and maybe a lot of these teams settle for field goals. That, yes, the running back scoring touchdowns would obviously be optimal, but they're going to generate their points regardless because they're going to be touching the ball so often. If these drives stall, then the kickers come into play.
Yeah, I think at the flex position, I think the kickers come into play more depending on how the value plays go on the slate. So, like Gostkowski and Zerline, I think whether or not they come into play for Showdown is maybe less about the game flow and more about what happens with Philip Dorsett or CJ Anderson or Tyler Higbee or Gerald Everett. Like, those are the guys that are going to impact whether or not the kicker is optimal. So if those guys all tank and a kicker has like 7 fantasy points, that could be enough to vault him into the lineup. I occasionally will run lineups that have kickers at captain, and I think that's where I start thinking about the things that you're talking about, is creating rules. Like, if I'm going to use a kicker at captain, then that means he's going to have an explosive game. That means the quarterbacks and running backs aren't going to be scoring touchdowns, and so maybe those lineups are better to go after PPR targets and wide receivers versus touchdowns if the kicker is kind of in the optimal as the captain.
Finally, we've seen a lot of duplicated lineups and a big split at the top of all of these. Does ownership factor in for you with this? Because I would imagine that projecting ownership for a Showdown slate is incredibly difficult. Now, across almost all sports, you're one of the best in the business at projecting ownership. So if anyone can do it, I'm guessing it's you, Mr. Drew. But is there other things that you can do, like leaving salary on the table that you just bake into all your lineups to make sure that you don't have the most common ones?
Yeah, we've seen some weird things with the Showdown slates, and I definitely am not good at projecting ownership for Showdown specifically. It's something I think it matters a lot, but a bunch of the Showdowns that I've won, obviously it's great. It's amazing if you're able to split one with just one other person. That's like life-changing money. But if you're splitting like 100K with 10 people, that's not too bad either. And so over time, I've tried to avoid or worry about avoiding dupes a little bit less and just focus on building smart lineups. And if I happen to duplicate some of those with other users, I think that's okay sometimes. I would say the one thing I've been thinking about more recently is, like, you want to avoid the lineup that's duped by like 2,000 people, right? And so perhaps there's way to create rules that avoid kind of the obvious builds in Showdown.
I would think for this slate, Tom Brady as the captain would be the obvious build, unless the people use Sony Michel in that spot.
Yeah, I was wondering, Sony Michel versus James White was something that had been thinking about specifically because I think with the kind of back-to-back big games for Michel, that his ownership could surpass White, and perhaps he would be one of the heavier owned captains. I think Brady was only 10% owned as the captain in the last slate, and that was with a really good scoring environment for the passing game. So we're talking about 10%. It's not like the captain ownerships get out of hand.
I can imagine that the Brady ownership in the Chiefs game was that way because there were so many Chiefs in the game to really pile it up. And with the Patriots as an underdog, people thought the Chiefs were going to win. So you pile up on the Chiefs. This time around with the Patriots favored, I could see that swinging. And where this is such a large contest with $1 million at top prize, you're going to get a lot of people playing Showdown for the first time. And I think just logically, they'll see that Brady isn't the highest price player, that they'll just go to him instinctively.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I do think Brady is a decent captain play just in general because the Patriots offense is a little bit more diverse than the Rams offense. And so I think the path for Brady to be the captain and outscore the wide receivers is a viable one. I think that with Goff, most of his passing volume goes either to Gurley if he's playing the whole game or to Woods and Cooks and Reynolds. And so I think that if the Rams passing offense goes off, I still think it's a pretty likely scenario that one of the wide receivers ends up really popular. Whereas if the Patriots passing game goes off, it could be through Brady.
All right, so let's talk about some picks specifically at the top end. What do we do with Todd Gurley? Only the 5 touches. in the game against the Saints. CJ Anderson's the man. CJ Anderson's super cheap. He gets these 2 weeks off. There's reports that it wasn't even really a knee injury that was hampering him. I find that incredibly difficult to believe, that if you're going to be in the Super Bowl, you have Todd Gurley, who was an MVP candidate. He wasn't really, but by the media and the odds he was like 8 weeks ago, that if he's healthy, you're not going to use him as much as possible.
I know that this is the $1 million question, and if you figure this one out, then you got a big leg up. I'm not only trying to figure out what they're going to do with Gurley, but what does the public think is going to happen? My initial thought was the same as you, that they're going to go back to using Gurley as the workhorse, that you need to have his passing game involvement in order to beat the Patriots, and that he'll get 75% of touches again, including all the red zone work. But if everybody's going that way, I mean, it's still from the coach speak, it still seems like they want to use CJ Anderson. I'll end up using Gurley on plenty of lineups. I'm still not sure what I'm going to do with Anderson. I do think that I'll create a rule for my lineups that make sure that I have at most one of Gurley or Anderson on my lineups.
Could you? I would expect CJ Anderson to be the one who ends up being the higher owned, just because he's a lot cheaper and you get the recency bias baked in. You can afford more expensive players with him in it. But is there any viability to playing Gurley and CJ Anderson against a Patriots run defense, which is not as good as their pass defense, or even on the other side of the ball, run out a combo, which is probably far more viable, of James White and Sony Michel?
Yeah, there's definitely viability. My winning Patriots lineup was talked about earlier did have James White and Sony Michel on a Patriots onslaught with Julian Edelman. And so 2 Patriots running backs is something that is viable. And this is one of the things I love about Showdown so much, is everything is so game specific and so team specific. So it really does depend on the team and the scenario. And it seems like Gurley and CJ Anderson could be a viable outcome if they really do go with the committee, if the Rams do get ahead and try to control the clock. So I wouldn't rule out Gurley and CJ Anderson together. I would say if I'm going to play them together, I would make sure not to play Jared Goff on that team, because you're probably going to need multiple touchdowns between those 2 backs. And if that happens, then Goff's not going to outscore the wide receivers. So that's kind of how I'm trying to think about both the Rams and the Patriots, is if lineups have 2 running backs, making sure that I avoid the quarterbacks for those teams.
I guess the other thing too, I mean, can you play Tom Brady and Sony Michel together? I know that you can, and it can work, but optimally, is that a good strategy considering Sony Michel has 1 reception in his past 6 games?
Yeah, it's anything can happen. I think if you were playing Brady with 2 wide receivers and Michel, and they score 3 or 4 touchdowns, I mean, that's not totally out of the question, but it's definitely something that's less likely.
So from the Rams receiving side of the ball, far more people, I think at least, are going to use Brady than use Goff. And if you think that the Rams are going to win, maybe a Rams stack with Goff and the receivers onslaught, maybe one of those tight ends is the way to go. If you're going to play an onslaught either way from either side, play Brady and the receivers, Goff and the receivers, who do you bring it back with from the other team? Do you just kind of pick and choose, or is there someone specifically that you'd be looking at?
Yeah, it depends on how the value shakes out. I definitely would be looking at Julian Edelman and James White for Patriots targets that would be high PPR upside on DraftKings format if the Patriots were to fall behind because the Rams pulled ahead early. So I'm generally trying to look at the PPR targets as far as bringing it back with a quarterback onslaught, opposed to bringing it back with both quarterbacks. I do think lineups that play both quarterbacks end up being some of the more heavily duplicated lineups.
Yeah, I can see that too, just because people have it in their mind that quarterbacks are the highest scoring fantasy players. Therefore, I'm going to need them in my lineup in order to win, despite the fact that they're 2 of the 3 most expensive players on the Showdown slate. If you're going to do a Rams onslaught, does it make any sense to bring it back with Sony Michel? Because in that game script, the Patriots have gotten up by a bunch because of running and rushing touchdowns, and then it's Goff in the passing game trying to stage the comeback to pile up points.
Yeah, I mean, there's some merit to that. I think I would probably think about it the other way. But I mean, one of the crazy things about Showdown, and it kind of anything can happen. We've seen really, really insane, outlandish things win Showdown, and if you happen to those outlandish things aren't going to be heavily owned, and because of that, you end up duping with fewer users, or you happen to take home a solo million or something like that. So it's truly one of the things that anything can happen. I try to focus on the stuff that's most likely to happen. And that's another reason building 150 lineups helps manage that risk.
Rams passing game, Cooks or Woods? I'm going Team Cooks on this one.
I like Woods. I think he'll be a little overowned. I actually like Josh Reynolds as kind of the contrarian option on the Ram side of things as for a value play.
So I was thinking I was going to pair Woods and Cooks together as sort of a grouping and decide which one I like the most. And I think the upside of Cooks in this matchup, in his second consecutive revenge scenario, always good to see for Brendan Cooks. And with Josh Reynolds, I kind of tie him closer to the tight ends because when Josh Reynolds is on the field, that means that both tight ends will not be. And if both tight ends are on the field, obviously Josh Reynolds is going to be taking a seat on the pine. He's seen his snaps drop a little tiny bit over the past few. Like I think he played 83% and 75% in the two playoff games. Like, would you play Reynolds or potentially Higbee or Everett in this situation? And do you have a preference between Rams tight ends? Because I like Everett more with the higher ADOT.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and maybe you could create a group in the Daily Roto Optimizer to play at most one of Reynolds, Higbee, or Everett on the lineups that you make, so that if you are building 150, you don't end up with Higbee and Everett competing at the tight end position and Reynolds in the same lineup. I do slightly prefer Everett from a value perspective. I think we have them projected pretty closely to each other, but Everett slightly ahead and at a slightly cheaper price tag.
So the Patriots, other dudes. So you have Hogan, Dorsett, like you mentioned, Cordero Patterson is on that list, and he will also get the ability to at least have one kickoff return. We'll see how many go, but that's just an extra touch for him. And he's sort of a boomer bust type player that if you get the ball in his hands, it's always sort of like the Kamara situation where I don't think he returned a punt for a touchdown this year. Antonio Brown sort of the same way, that just anytime you can get extra touches to these guys, it always seems like a good thing unless they get hurt from them. So I like that with Cordero Patterson. I think because of his price that he is going to be owned. So do you prefer Dorsett or do you prefer Hogan?
I prefer Hogan because I think he'll be lower owned, and Hogan is on the field a ton. And so I think with the touchdowns that Dorsett had recently, along with the lower ownership, that I think Hogan makes for a nice pivot for the Patriots. I'll have exposure to both guys, but I'll probably try to get more Hogan than Dorsett because I think in the event that he does have a ceiling game, it'll provide me more leverage on the field.
Do you think that Cordero Patterson will be the Patriots player that just gets thrown in the bottom of all these lineups?
Yeah, this is definitely a tough one, and there's plenty of narratives around the Super Bowl you can sell. I know in the past couple Super Bowls, the Patriots have attempted passes with Edelman and Amendola, and with the multiple weeks to prepare, like you could see some gadget plays with Patterson. But I mean, really, I'm looking for the guys that are going to be on the field more. But in general, I'd say these offenses are concentrated, so you have to find ways to differentiate, and Cordero is one of those guys.
All right, Colin Drew, dailyroto.com. Any final suggestions for showdown lives? Maybe something, just don't do this if you're filling out a roster.
Yeah, just make sure you're building lineups and that tell the right story. And so we've tried to tell a couple of those stories, but anything can happen. This game could go 15 points over the total, or it could go 20 points under. If you are a Daily Roto subscriber, you can customize our projections to reflect that, and you can create rules to ensure that your lineups make sense. At a minimum, if you're playing a wide receiver or a tight end as your captain, make sure to play their quarterback.
Colin Drew, you can follow him on Twitter at Drewby417. And again, check out dailyroto.com, Colin's golf podcast. And if you use the promo code ThePME, get yourself 10% off on dailyroto.com for all of their sports packages. And something I suggest to do. I'll be back here in like 3-4 seconds with my main man, the Gup. Welcome back to the Pat Mayo Experience. I hope you enjoyed that 3-second break. Now joining me to continue our breakdown of the Super Bowl Showdown slate on DraftKings from GupsCorner.com. You may have seen him on the golf show earlier this week. Hopefully there were winners to be had, and if there wasn't, maybe he's got some winners for you right now. It's the Gup, Brandon Guptill from GupsCorner.com. You ready for some showdown?
I am. I was telling you, this was kind of the only thing I was successful with last year in NFL. So I'm excited for it. I the way it's set up and the way the Super Bowl is kind of going, this may be the only excitement I get besides doing a bunch of random props just for the fun of it. I had a long-term Saints ticket for an outright winner that crashed last week. So I have no value really going into it. So, I'm kind of looking forward to this. I like the showdown slate and the way they have the captain set up. So it's always a normal fun for me.
I talked to Drewby a little bit about the strategy that goes into Showdown and what you really need to be looking for. And you mentioned something that I thought was really critical on the golf show this week is you can have the guys that you like, But what you really need to know is that this is still a game. There's still ownership to be had. There's different roster construction. So when you're talking about a Super Bowl slate like this, $1 million for the first prize winner, so many different people in this tournament, what strategies do you think you have to use if you actually want to win? Because if you just pick the 6 most obvious guys, and you do win, you're going to be splitting it with like 100,000 people. That's not going to be worth it.
Correct. I mean, you have to be willing to and it's tough, and especially, in a 2-game slate to, pick Gerald Everett, at $2,000 or something like that. I mean, you have to make that, out of the box type of thinking, and can this go well? And if it does, then I have a clearer vision to get to the end. But because you're going to go back to always wanting the chalk type of plays, and you have such a small field you're looking at, your eyes are going to go back to those same guys. And so you have to kind of condition yourself to say, where do I want to take a couple of chances? And if they hit, they hit. If they don't, at least if they would have, I had the opportunity for a bigger plus EV than anything else out there.
So just quick tip strategy that you could give someone who wants to jump into this and tell them what not to do. Like, don't use all your salary cap. Would that be number one?
Yeah, especially in this week, with so many eyes on it, so many big contests out there, that's going to be key. One of the strategies I focused on last year that continued to seem to work is I tried to identify the 1 or 2 guys in the mid salary range that I could make captain and build off of that way. I very rarely take one of the top price or the top price period as my captain. Because that seems to be kind of default for some people. Is Tom Brady's my captain. Well, you and 90 other thousand people are probably going to put Tom Brady as your captain, so it really limits your building model because you're already so much alike everybody with that captain costing 1.5 times the price.
And they're the most expensive players generally that people will gravitate towards, limiting what you can do around. So you think that probably a mid-tier captain will lead itself to a more balanced build?
Correct. And if you're doing a lot of lineups 20 plus, I mean, there were times I'd take something crazy. Like this week, it could be James Devlin at $400 that costs you 600, put him at captain. And then you could, build all kinds of crazy stuff with that. And you don't have to do like 10 lineups with them, but a couple. And, especially the last few games, he's been heavily involved around the goal line. So if he had one of those rare 2 touchdown games or something, I mean, you just, he killed the slate.
So Julian Edelman, to make him your captain, would be $16,200. That's more than both of the quarterbacks. That's more than Todd Gurley. It's more than everyone's main man in Super Bowls, James White. Do you think that means that people will not make Edelman their captain? Because I think that he might actually be a contrarian play.
Could be, especially at the captain spot. I think he could definitely, and I see him having a pretty good game because I think the Rams are, I think the Patriots know they're good up front and they're going to try to dink and dunk it like they did a couple of weeks ago against the Chargers, or when they played the Ravens during season. So and even I think the Bears. So, one of the first things I try to do is I try to say, how's this game going to play out to me and build around it. And if the game script is terrible, oh, well, at least I had a vision of how I thought the game would play. I made my picks there and going on. And, if he's going to be low, yeah, you certainly could go up top on a few lineups with him and separate yourself from the field.
So when you talk about those mid-tier guys, whether it be in a captain spot, whether it be for just building your lineup around similarly priced players and maybe even leaving a little of the salary cap behind just to differentiate your lineup, which guys in this game in particular are you looking at in that mid-range?
Yeah, so I see the Patriots winning, obviously with most of the world right now. That's kind of the chalk. But, with that, one of the strategies I employed a lot last year was if I thought it was going to be a complete domination on one side, I would try to find the one guy from the other team that I like the most. So in this case, it'd probably be Robert Woods at 7,800, which is 11.7 at captain. Put him as my captain and then have all Patriots underneath. That's one strategy that I like to look at. If I was going to go the other way, James White is up there. I really think CJ Anderson is going to be highly kind of owned in this just because of how cheap he is and people have seen what they saw the last 2 weeks. And so I wouldn't be afraid to put Gurley in and just hope, hey, the 2 weeks off, whatever, it's a Super Bowl. We still know his ceiling if he plays and he plays well, catching and running. And so catching could be huge for him this game. And DraftKings, we know that that's huge for the PPR. So I wouldn't be afraid to go Gurley as well. And he's kind of high at 9,000, but he's above, he's below the 5-figure guys.
In a game like this, defenses or kickers, will they make your player pool?
Not this game. And typically, yeah, on Showdown, I'd love to find the defense that could get, pick six, kickoff return, touchdown, something like this. I don't see this as like a 17-13 type of game. Mainly it's indoors, it's on the track. So that gives the Rams, they're kind of used to playing fast from, prior to moving, but their offense is built for that. Patriots tend to score, well this year. So I see mid 20s, 30s for both teams are potential. So I don't see kickers or defense in my build at all.
You mentioned the track, and he just posted a pretty decent revenge game against the Saints. Maybe Brandon Cooks on the fast track, revenge game against the Patriots.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I like both those guys, Woods and Cooks. But yeah, Cooks is fast. We know that the Patriots secondary sometimes can be susceptible to that. So I wouldn't mind Cooks at all here.
I guess the other one too is, will you be going with the quarterbacks in this spot? Do you play both of them? Do you pick the side that you want to stack and either take Goff or take Brady, or do you think it's viable to play them both?
I think playing on both would probably be more contrarian than not. I think Brady's going to be high owned. I think what we'll have to do as we get a little bit closer to kickoff is trying to figure out how much do I have to be leveraged to him, because the problem with some of these, especially the quarterbacks, is if you have them in the right spot, but you're not near the ownership of especially the big pool. So the $1 million one, that guy goes off. It's hard for you to make up ground because you have a similar build as 20,000 other people. And so you either have to be way off the board on your contrarian underneath him, or almost be over leveraged on one or the other. Like, I don't think Goff's going to be really high owned compared to Brady. So if you take that stance and then maybe just do Brady's weapons, that's certainly a viable option to get leverage, because Goff won't be near what Brady will be.
Is there any situation where you can see playing James White and Sony Michel together?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, especially where their salaries came in. Sony's my number 2 ranked in this showdown slate, quote unquote. 6,800. The hard part, if this was like a week 12 Sunday night football game, I probably wouldn't play much, because there was 2 teams I hated playing on Showdown. And it was the Saints and the Patriots, because there's like 90 guys that can score a touchdown, and the coaches don't really care who does it. Bill doesn't care. And so it was hard to isolate down, is it going to be a Burkhead week? Is Philip Dorsett going to break loose? Cordell Patterson? Those 2 teams are very hard to figure out who's going to score, and scoring matters in these 2-game showdown slates. So, don't be afraid to take darts, because if Chris Hogan winds up breaking, 8 catches with a touchdown and nobody has him at 3,800, I mean, he's going to be a great play for you. And we know that Bill will strategize to get the ball where he thinks the Rams don't think it's going.
Well, CJ Anderson is at $5,200. So let's go below him. Who is a pick or 2 you can see playing in a lot of lineups from that low end? I know you mentioned Devlin because of his super cheap price. That's a bit iffier. There are safer plays in that region. So is there anyone that you particularly like?
Yeah, I like Philip Dorsett. With Josh Gordon kind of out, him and Patterson have kind of taken up, even more of a deal. I just have Dorsett slightly ranked above him. So if you have Tom up there, maybe you have him even in the captain spot, going to him at 4,200 helps you gain a little bit of leverage there. And then on the Saints side, picking the right tight end is huge, and both of them are about the same price, which is Everett and Higbee. I think, getting one of those in, which they're valuable options right now, I lean Everett. And so if he can get a touchdown for me, and it gives me a little bit more ownership than getting risky down there, especially with, Devlin, I'll have Devlin in for fun, but like you said, that's a lot risky. And then a guy that's right there around the 52, like you said, that I really like this week is Josh Reynolds for the Rams as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with Josh Reynolds, because there's been a lot of just jumbo sets that the Rams have been running the last 2 weeks, having both Everett and Higbee both on the field playing over 50% of the snaps. Everett playing just a slight tick more, played 67 against the New Orleans Saints. But with the Patriots, they've been generating a decent pass rush. They've been scheming it, but when you think about the Saints and you think about the Cowboys, they're going to get pressure with their front four regardless. So you have to scheme to take that away to allow yourself to have time to pass. I don't necessarily know if that they're going to end up running a ton of jumbo and running the ball against the Patriots, especially if they have to play catch up. That we saw for the majority of the season that they played these 3 wide receiver sets. Josh Reynolds was always on the field. Then all of a sudden he just kind of disappeared and was only playing half of the snaps. So that's a really interesting play. Do you think that they go back to that look that they had earlier in the year with Reynolds?
I do. And so this goes back to, and you nailed it, is game scripting. What do you think is going to happen? And I think the Patriots score, get up, put some pressure on the Rams where they can't control the clock and kind of just get to the end of the game. I think they're going to have to score. And so you're right. It puts them in that 3 wide receiver set a lot more. And for me, if you're looking for a little bit different play than Woods or Cooks, it's obviously going to be highly owned. Reynolds fits that slate perfectly, especially at the price.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, it was 87% of the snaps for Josh Reynolds against the Cowboys, down to 75% against the Saints. So if he can stick around that 90 number, if they do go to these wide receiver 3 sets, that I think that he could end up being a real potential value here. So before I let you go, Gup, are you going to play any second half only showdown slates on DraftKings, or does that depend on how it's going for you on the main slate?
Yeah, probably how it's going and then how the golf went. Hopefully I got major sweat as the Super Bowl's coming to an end on the waste management. Last year I had Woodland and I double bet him because I got him through the mid tournament. And so the Super Bowl had already kicked off and I was on the back porch kind of by myself sweating out. And all these guys are like, "Why aren't you watching the game?" I'm like, I got way more action on this TV right now than I care about that football. So yeah, I probably wouldn't do second half, but it's not, depending on how it build, it's not a terrible idea if you can kind of see how the game flow's going and potential, jump on a spot that others may not think of. If I did that, I would aim more towards the single entry or 3 max. So I don't have to try to build something crazy and just throw one in there to say, well, here, I think this may happen in the second half.
All right. Gup from gupscorner.com. Tell everyone what is going on, the major changes at gupscorner.com coming in February.
Yeah, so Monday, right after the Super Bowl and waste management, we will start our premium service, which is $69 a year or $6.99 a month from February 4th through Sunday at Augusta. Then we go to our standard price, which is $9.99 and $99. With this promo, our friends over at Fantasy National, which Mayo's heavily involved in, Moose, who's the founder, has thrown in a package with us as well. And so we bought a package to go to Blue Jack National in Houston, which is Tiger Woods course, for an entire weekend, 3 days, 2 nights, 2 rounds of golf. Bucks, my partner at Gups Corner, myself, and Moose will all be there, and we're going to fly in a guest. If you sign up for the annual subscription during that early bird special, Sunday night after the Masters, we're going to do a drawing, and we'll draw one name out, and we'll fly them in 2 weeks for the last weekend of April, which will be an awesome time. I mean, it's almost like if you want to call it a cheap raffle for $69 to go to a highly exclusive course, do it that way. But glad to be a partner with Moose, obviously great, innovator in our industry. And we're looking forward to offering a lot more than what we do now, including a private premium Slack channel and many other things to come. But we're looking forward to it and appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. No better real group of guys out there than gupscorner.com. Run the big one and done, the Super 7 contest as well during the football season. They got you covered for what you need. Fantasy NASCAR coming up as well. So there's a whole bunch of really fun contests over there. I recommend everyone go check it out. That, and if you do play golf, you should be a member at Fantasy National. You'd be crazy not to at this point. However, that will do it for me. Actually, Gup, give me a pick. Score of the Super Bowl. You got Patriots? Patriots by what?
I got Patriots 38-21, win by 17.
What if I told you that the Rams are going to win 49-3?
I would bet that if I was you, because you would make a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't actually think that's going to happen, but I could see a scenario where, you remember 2 weeks ago when everyone was like, the Patriots are trash, they're going to get beat by the Chargers? That turns out they may have just played over their heads for 2 weeks and the Rams come in and shellac them. I think that's in the range of outcomes here.
It certainly is. I mean, those exotic bets you can make with point spread alternates, Rams by 14 plus. I mean, those are where it gets fun at this game to sit down and throw some fun money on the props.
All right. I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me on Twitter at the PME sub to the audio podcast, and on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Spotify, Google Play, wherever it may be to download podcasts, you can download and find on demand for free the Pat Mayo Experience. New shows every day. But if you want to get into a draw for $20 DK, there are 2 ways to do that. And I'll be announcing the winner on next Monday's show, which, if you subscribe, it'll just pop up on your feed and you can listen to see if you won or not. Or just check your DraftKings account. The 2 ways. 1, smash the like button for the episode. Leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section and tell me which player below $5,000 that if you played 150 lineups and someone told you that you had to play one of those guys and it could only be one of them, which one would it be at that price point? Or leave a review on the iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher page. 5 stars, quick write-up, something you like about the show with your DraftKings handle, and boom, you're in a draw for that as well. And that's an easy one because very few people do it. Higher percentage chance of getting that $20. And hey, maybe you'll hit the double and win both and get $40. I don't know. It's a random draw. But thank you all for watching. Enjoy the Super Bowl. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!